Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining us for What's Cooking for Passover, the Cream Puff Challenge. And why the Cream Puff Challenge? I would say, and I look forward to discussing this further with the amazing Sarah Lohman, our culinary historian, the challenge is not just the cream puff. I think the challenge is also creating a Passover dessert that is light, that is delicious to eat, and that is not candy or just fruit, right? I think many of us can empathize with having to trying to create attractive and tasty Passover desserts only to be disappointed in our own product. I have not so fond memories of years ago baking a cake that was specifically for Passover, where the grain was actually baby food rice cereal and bananas, and it basically came out as the best way I can describe it is a bundt-shaped hockey puck, essentially. And so when Sarah and I were discussing this program, and we wanted to try and come up with a recipe that would be light, that would be fun, and that is something that she could show you how to do at home. Okay, so that we don't have to have the disappointment of a flat and unpleasant Passover dessert. Okay, but first I also want to talk a little bit about how the different materials that we have here at AJHS and how we document Passover here in our collections. So some of this documentation is exactly what you would expect it to be. It is photographs of different seders. It is photographs of the different ways in which Jews across the United States observe Passover. And as you can imagine, there's such a diversity of Jews in America geographically and in observance, there's also that diversity in our materials as well. All of these pictures, however, are from the collection of the National Jewish Welfare Board, the Army and Navy Department specifically, and the NJWB documented Jewish life in America. But a lot of the pictures for Passover in their collections document how NJWB was helping Jews observe Passover when they could not be with their families or when their circumstances prohibited them from observing in the way they normally would. So here are some of these beautiful pictures here. This is a Seder for the U.S. Army, Navy, and Marine Corps, Passover 1926 for American personnel who were stationed in Manila. And I really love that photo. All three of these photos, I might add, are fully digitized and available through our catalog, but are also available on the AJHS Flickr stream as well. Then in the upper corner, you have a very happy Private First Class Gustafson, who was in Denver for basic training. And what the NJWB did is they reached out to local Denver families and said, would you host a service person for Passover? And so in this family, they did. He's getting to sample the homemade gefilte fish of his hosts. Everyone looks very happy. But again, it shows the different ways that NJWB was trying to look out, particularly for the Jewish Americans who were serving their country in the armed forces. And then in the bottom corner, we have a different kind of outreach around observance. These are women who were organized by the NJWB who were delivering Passover care packages, ostensibly of kosher food, to individuals who were hospitalized and who could not observe with their families and who perhaps could not get kosher food in that hospital. And the two pictures on the side of Private Gustafson and the ladies delivering packages, those are from the 50s, where obviously the other one predates that by about 25 years. And this is just a small sampling of the kind of photographs that we have within that collection, but also within the AJHS collections in general. So we have these photo and archival documentation of Passover and different ways to observe. But as you can imagine, through our extensive library collection of over 50,000 books, we also have a great many books, source books, and also Haggadah related to, again, different ways to observe and how different congregations and individuals chose to observe Passover. On that old-looking book with the little lock on it, so you know it's very special when you put a lock on it, that's actually a very small miniature book. It's only about 1.5 to 2 inches in length. And it comes from the Satius family collection, which is one of the older collections that we have here at AJHS. And that is a book of high holiday rituals and observances, not just Passover, but Passover is also in there. And that dates back to 1740. And obviously, books were an expensive thing to have at that point in time. You're talking still about the hand press period. So it was very common for a variety of different things to be bound together so that you only had to have one book as opposed to multiple books, which could be expensive. In the middle, we have the Freedom Seder, a new Haggadah for Passover that was created by Arthur Waskow, Reform rabbi and activist. We have his papers here at AJHS, which are truly a wonderful, wonderful resource when looking at Jewish activism and also how religious ritual and observance changes over time. And the Freedom Seder has been adopted to many, many different causes and by many, many different congregations. But it's also it's a really, really beautiful thing. And again, an interesting reflection on how observance changes over time with, through a variety of factors. And then the third one is just such an interesting thing that we have. And this is a Haggadah that is done entirely in Braille. And you can't really tell from the one page that's here, but it's huge. It's about the size of a photo scrapbook. And it is the first one I believe that was done here in America, and it is the complete Hebrew and English text. And so the only actual printed text is this title page here, and then the rest of it is entirely in Braille. And this was done in 1964 by the American Printing House for the Blind. And these are just a small sample. These are just 3 of the hundreds of Haggadah that we have in our collection, including about, somewhere between 50 and 70 years of the ubiquitous Maxwell House produced one every year. We have a great many of these as well, in addition to all of the other ones we have for women to celebrate, women's contributions, ones for children, so that children can also learn the basics of religious observance, dating back to some of our earliest collection materials right up to the present day. So this is a very large collection of materials for us, and also, again, an important one to document all the different ways that people can celebrate and observe Passover. And then we get to the cookbooks. And as you all probably know from various other Inside the Archives and Live from the Archives presentations, we have a wonderful cookbook collection. Probably at this point now, with new donations, we're up to about 500 or 600 cookbooks total. And as you can imagine, a great deal of them are devoted to Passover. What to cook for Passover, what can we do? And the 3 that are along the side, these are ones that were done by various sisterhoods, by Hadassah chapters, by synagogues. You can see, we have the Pesach cookbook, we have the Passover cookbook, All Who Are Hungry Come and Eat, one from Massachusetts, and then we have Passoverama, a cookbook for Passover from which this cream puff recipe that Sarah is going to demo for us came from. And then that larger image there where it says Passover dishes, this is actually from the collection of the Hadassah Archive. It is from the oldest cookbook that we have in the Hadassah Archive, which is from 1928. It is the Naomi cookbook, which actually hails from a Hadassah chapter in Canada, in Toronto to be specific. And so here we have some traditional things. We have our chopped meat and beet borscht, but then of course we have sponge cake, because everyone always wants to try to make a good sponge cake on Passover. And the question is, how can you make it work? How can you make it work without that leavening, right? And honestly, unfortunately, the top of this is clipped off, but one of the other pieces I love about it is that there's an advertisement at the top that talks about how, you have to get your house in order for Passover, and you have so much cleaning to do. Let us help. Call, and the number is something like 15 Lombard, whatever, to get your laundry done. So that this way you can concentrate on all your cooking and all your house cleaning and making sure everything is ship-shape before you need to have your guests over for Passover. And then, so now we've seen all these different things that AJHS documents. We've seen the photographs, we've seen the Haggadah, and we've seen the cookbooks. And there's a theme also that runs through a lot of these things here when we're talking about Passover and documentation, and it's matzah. Okay, it's matzah, obviously one of the most commonly eaten things around the Passover holiday. And the distribution of matzah is also heavily documented in our collections here as well. So that blue sheet there, that is an archival collection that is related to when the Jewish community in the mid to late 19th century here in New York, they raised money and they hired a baker to bake matzah that they were going to distribute for free to Jewish New Yorkers who were having financial trouble and who perhaps could not afford to buy it and were struggling in terms of being able to do everything that they wanted to do for Passover. This is also fully digitized, and so you can see here, this is the distribution list. So those are the names of the individuals who were received their free matzah, and then their addresses as well. And there's a few more pieces of documentation that you can look at on our website. And then we have two more pictures, also from NJWB, also documenting the distribution of matzah. The top one is American servicemen and a servicewoman in Guam, right after, at some point during World War II. The woman in the picture, who I don't believe is identified, but she is only one of 7 servicewomen who were stationed in Guam at that period in time. And so they're all sitting there quite happy, enjoying their matzah, right? And then that bottom picture also is the uniformed armed services personnel getting ready to distribute the matzah. All of those bags and boxes, those are matzah that were going to get distributed to the various troops and bases to make sure that servicemen and women could have the foods that they want, that they need in order to observe. And then last, again, we have cookbooks that are even just devoted to matzah. I personally love this one. This is a new one that was donated to us, not by matzah alone. And it talks about things that you can do with matzah, but also all the different things that you can do that don't involve matzah. So they have sort of 2 different focuses on that. And then I want to get to one of my absolute favorite items in the collection that also shows the importance of matzah. And that is this cookbook that was created by the Manischewitz Company in the 1930s. It's called Tempting Kosher Dishes. And as a book itself, it's actually a really interesting specimen of a cookbook. It is, the typical cookbook that's created by manufacturer. They create it to sell more product. They create it to make people think about all the different things that you can do with their products, right? And so here we have lovely Tempting Kosher Dishes, which not only has recipes inside, but has what is basically a full color centerfold, which is pictured here, that shows the brand new Manischewitz bakery that they just had built, a brand new bakery in Cincinnati, #1 on 8th Street, that was at that point in time the largest matzah bakery in the world. And as I said, this cookbook was done in the mid 1930s here in America. And so they obviously, this is actually a cookbook also that's of a much nicer quality than the usual sort of giveaway cookbooks by manufacturers, which tended to be more of a soft cover, a cheaper item, easier to ship. This is a hardcover item, again, with full color plates, which is also unusual. And it also has a really, really interesting feature that I didn't even notice until I had looked at this cookbook multiple times. And that is the end papers. And so what's an end paper? When you open up a book, say, I'll get a sample out here. When you open up a book, these are your end papers here. And depending on the book, a lot of times for fiction, they're just white. Here in this cookbook, the end papers are printed with measures and equivalents. A lot of times in cookbooks, it's printed with, helpful information, tips, that kind of thing. But Manischewitz did something a little different here, which is that we have a sort of a faraway view on one side and a close-up view on the other. They had specially printed end papers made up. Those are tiny matzah. So to reinforce that the importance of matzah, all the things that you can do with Manischewitz matzah meal, and according to this book, it's a good breakfast cereal. You can use it in savory dishes. You can use it in sweet dishes. According to Manischewitz in this cookbook, there's nothing that you can't do with matzah meal as far as they are concerned. And so this is where now we're going to bring it to Sarah Lohman, who our fantastic culinary historian, who is going to show us all how she's going to make cream puffs, or how she made cream puffs out of matzah meal, which is a feat that I did not even think was possible. So Sarah, take it away.
Me neither, Melanie. When we were sort of discussing what fun Passover recipes wanted to make. We did originally stumble across that cream puff recipe in Passover Rama, which is an amazing name for a cookbook anyway. And I was really like, is this possible? Can this be done? And we started talking about the Manischewitz cookbook as well, Tempting Kosher Dishes, which is fully readable online. There is a link in the article that went live today about how to make these cream puffs. And I noticed that they also had a recipe for cream puffs in it. So that's the one that I ended up using. But I went into it, you did issue me this challenge of, can this be done? And I wanted to find out, whether or not it was a disaster. I was going to share it with you here today. Well, I am here to tell you that these cream puffs are so light and fluffy and beautiful. Bubby is not going to believe they're kosher for Passover, but trust me, they are. It really is astounding. So I've made cream puffs a lot of times. Specifically, I'll show you one of the finished products, not filled yet, but this is just the shell. The dough for this is called pâté au choux, which is one of the basic French pastries. And I would say it's less tricky than, say, laminating dough for croissants, but at the same time, it requires a precision because there's technology going on in here. Cream puffs rely on steam. The dough has to be moist yet elastic, so that when it goes into the oven and is blasted with a really high heat, the steam puffs up the puff. And then you turn down the temperature and let it toast some more so that the dough becomes nice and crispy and firm and doesn't sink after you bring it out of the oven. So I am really amazed that this is matzah meal. And you know what? I'll even give you an inside look at it. I'm just cutting it in half and then I'm going to hold it up to the camera. This one doesn't have a huge pocket, but that's okay. There's still plenty of room for cream in there too. And I'm going to show you how to fill them. I know, isn't it amazing? It really looks like it's made with flour, Melanie. I just cannot believe it. Crispy on the outside, soft in the middle. And you want these to be, it's even best to make these the day before. So these are like a tiny bit stale because then when you put the filling in, it'll resist getting moist a little bit longer. I mean, it will. You do want the inside to kind of be a little bit softer, but you want that outside to stay crisp. So make everything you can make the day before you serve it, and then you just fill them 2 to 4 hours before your Passover dinner. Really, and especially for a recipe that was written in a 1930 cookbook, I really could not imagine they were going to turn out this way. So the recipe is already up on the AJHS blog. I'm sure we can put a link in the chat too. If you've got questions as I'm going along, please feel free to drop them in the Q&A. Otherwise, let's get cooking and I'm going to show you how this is done. So right here, I've just got a pan that has a cup of water in it. And to that, I'm just going to add 1/3 of a cup of vegetable shortening. So vegetable shortening, I just have generic, but that's like your Crisco, which released its own Cooking for Passover cookbook as well, because this was really, I wouldn't call it a miracle, but they really, Crisco geared its advertising towards Jewish Americans since vegetable shortening is parve. It's neither meat nor dairy. So that's also what makes these kosher for Passover. So that goes in there too. And then the other thing that we need to add is just a little bit of salt, a 1/2 teaspoon, which I'm just going to measure in my hands here. 1/2 teaspoon. Boom. So then this goes on the stove and you just want to bring it to a boil. You want to see it bubbling and you want that fat to melt. In the meantime, we're going to measure out our matzah meal. I do have Manischewitz brand. That was what was at my local grocery store. I am based in Cleveland, Ohio. So I thought, oh, well, that cookbook's from Cincinnati. Are they still a local Ohio company? They are not. This at least is made in Newark, New Jersey, which there you go. So we'll just need a cup of the matzah meal. Now, the other ingredient that I have prepped out is 4 eggs. And I've cracked the eggs into a plastic measuring cup with a handle and a spout, but I haven't beaten them. I've just put them in there. And I've also did this a couple hours ago so that these eggs came to room temperature. Because one of the most difficult parts about this is, all right, first matzah meal is going to go in there. We're going to stir it. The heat will cook it a little bit automatically. And then we're going to add these eggs one at a time. So because this is sort of a difficult process and you're handling a lot of things, just a lot easier to pour it out of the measuring cup. And then you really have to stir everything together with a spatula as quickly as possible, because those raw eggs going into that hot, hot dough, you don't stir fast enough, you get scrambled eggs. So this is the part where you need to have some like good kitchen muscles. You could also do this in a stand mixer too, on a stir or at a perfectly low speed, just mixing it until you don't see any stickiness from the eggs before you add in another one. I want to top that off a little bit. That's not quite enough matzah. Any questions so far as I'm waiting for my water to boil here?
Not so far. We had one request to link to the recipe, which we put that in there so people can follow along at home.
Can do. So although I was dazzled by how well this manischewitz recipe turned out, they also offered a recipe for filling, which I really didn't like. And I list all the reasons in the blog post that I wrote, but the main one is that it included butter, which does make it difficult to serve after your Passover meal. Although Melanie told me about a Seder she went to once that was an all dairy Seder so that they could have an incredible spread of Passover friendly desserts, which love that idea.
Yeah, actually, I didn't go. I heard about it from a coworker who said it was just mind blowing that everybody, so they had this dairy Seder and everyone said, this is amazing, and it's not so heavy. And, and they said like this huge dinner. And then the host said, well, wait, it's because of what's coming. And then there was a whole table of desserts because since it was dairy, she could do whatever she wanted. And so, yeah, that's the only time I've ever heard of that. But
I'm a very dessert oriented woman. So like, I love that idea for a Seder. But if you're not, you got to serve a traditional brisket, right? So we can't have dairy in our dessert. So what I actually did is I started looking for vegan recipes for a custard or like a lemon curd equivalent, because of course something that's vegan is not going to have dairy in it. And so that would mean that can work for kosher for Passover. The filling was based largely around water. It was like eggs, thickened water, and a lemon. So it didn't really have a lot of richness or flavor to it. So what I've done, pulling from that original recipe and pulling from contemporary ones and put up on the blog is a vegan coconut lemon curd filling, which thickens really beautifully and is really, really delicious. Now, I will say that the best thickener for a cream puff filling, or it's technically called pastry cream in English, crème pâtisserie in French. And if you're a fan of British Bake Off, they're going to call it crème pat. What traditionally thickens a crème pat, at least in America, is cornstarch. In Europe, it's gelatin. Gelatin, obviously not kosher at all. Cornstarch, kosher for Passover, if you're Sephardic. If you're Sephardic, go for it. And I don't know about Romanot or Iranian or Ethiopian Jews. If anyone is in the audience, you'll have to tell me. But if you're Ashkenazic, no, it's still considered that it can be mistaken for a grain because it comes from corn. So you can't use cornstarch depending on how strict you're being with your Passover rules, but you can use potato flour to thicken. Doesn't work quite as well, but I use it in the filling that I'm going to show you today, and it gets the job done, certainly. And this is Bob's Red Mill brand. That's the only place I've seen it, but I'm sure there's other potato flour brands out there. Keeping in mind that potato starch and potato flour are not the same thing, and this recipe calls for potato flour too.
Yeah,
I didn't even have that on land.
And I'm actually shocked that I don't know the answer to this, but I bet you do. So what is Crisco actually made out of? Like what kind of oil is used?
It's vegetable oil.
It's just vegetable oil? Okay.
Yeah, it's just vegetable oil. That's what makes it. And even my generic brand is marked Harev, that it's kosher for Passover too. It's got the U in the circle. But yeah, it's just essentially, it's soybean oil, it's palm oil, which, has its own issues. Yeah, that's it.
Okay.
In a solid form. So that's why it's neither meat nor dairy. So it's melting in there. This is basically, it's to get it hot to both melt the solid fat, which in a traditional recipe would be butter, but also because we need to cook our matzah meal just a little bit as well. And you'll see me stir it very vigorously, and you're probably going to see me break a sweat because my oven is also preheated to 450 degrees. And it is a beautiful 71-degree day here in Cleveland, Ohio, which I love, but we're starting to get to the time where no more baking. No more baking happens in this unair conditioned apartment. Very, very tenement style. Okay, starting to come to a boil. So I'm just going to keep an eye on it over here. Okay. I'm going to bring you over so that you can see what it looks like when I dump the matzo meal in. So you can see it's boiling. Just going to give it a quick stir to dissolve the last of that fat. And then in goes my 1 cup of matzo meal. Okay, leave it on the heat, stir it, and you stir it until it no longer sticks to the side of the pan. It'll start to clump together in the center once it is cooked and some of this moisture has been cooked off. See, pretty quickly. I'm just going to give it, I always cook it just a little bit longer so there's no raw pieces in there. It's even got kind of like a gelatinous jiggle to it. Okay, doesn't take long at all. Here's the hard part though. Moving some things around. Sorry for making you dizzy. Okay, now we have to add our eggs in. So actually one thing that can help, because I don't want my bowl to slide, is I've already got a wet dishcloth under my cutting board, which is protecting my counter to stop it from sliding around. But I also don't want my bowl to slide. So I've just wet another dish towel, gonna put it underneath. It's probably gonna sizzle. Great, but that then will stop it from sliding around and gives me a little bit better grip. So, okay, you do 1 egg at a time, and then you stir, stir, stir as quickly as possible so that egg doesn't cook into scrambled eggs. It will start to make your biceps hurt. Trust me. Okay, and you want to stir basically until it looks dry again, until you don't see any sort of stringy, goopy egg bits, and then next one goes in. Now I'm sweating. This is the part that makes me sweat. Really, really vigorous and quickly, making a mess, but that's part of it. My kitchen counters always are a little bit tall for me, or perhaps I'm a little bit short for them. So it's always a little bit hard for me to get the proper leverage up here for anything like this. Okay, whew. 2 more. See, already at this part, I was not convinced these were gonna work, because when you do the classic French recipe, you stir it for like 10 minutes and then you let it cool and then you add the eggs one at a time. And so this in some ways is a little bit quicker, losing pieces of it, and a little bit simpler than the classic French recipe. So at this point, the temperature of it is coming down a little bit. So it's not quite so urgent to try to make sure that those eggs don't cook, but still we want to stir it until you don't see any goopy stringy bits. Last one and done. And it's making some like gushy sounds, but that's what it should be doing. I like to use a strong heat-safe spatula for this part. But again, a stand mixer would work too with a paddle attachment on a low setting. And it'll save your biceps some work as well. Okay, so this is our pâté au choux. Choux means cabbage, by the way. It's because when the cream puffs bake up, they look like little cabbages. All right, so next up, time to bake them. So I have a greased cookie sheet here, and my preferred way to parcel out the cream puffs is with what's known as a cookie scoop. I linked to one of these in the article as well. This is, I'm doing like really generous tablespoonfuls, and depending on how picky you want to be, you can come back in and like really shape them and take off the bits and make sure they're nice and dome shaped. But the reason I like the cookie scoop is because you get kind of a nice dome shape on top, and then you don't really have to fuss with it a lot. And you can obviously make them different sizes. It'll affect the baking time. I would just bake them less in sort of the lower rounds. You can make them really little like that, and that will come out very, very round on top. If you don't have a cookie scoop, although you should, if you don't have one, you've been missing out. You can use 2 spoons to drop and shape them. I wouldn't recommend using a pastry bag, as this dough, as you can see, is like lumpy, you know.
Also, it looks really thick. I mean, it looks pretty thick. So a pastry bag, I don't think that would really be. It would just.
You just got to use a wide nozzle, because this actually isn't. It is sticky though. This isn't much any thicker than how pâté au choux actually looks, because the dough does have to be thick to keep that heat trapped inside, to be able to maintain the rise. And that's part of the reason why this recipe works as a Passover recipe, because there is no leavening added. There's no yeast, there's no baking soda. The leavening is air, which, much like with a sponge cake where you beat eggs and beat eggs to make them nice and fluffy, air is an acceptable form of Passover fluffiness.
Sarah, we got a question in the Q&A. Someone asked how much water was put in the pot originally.
1 cup. That is in the recipe. So cup of water, cup of matzah, a cup of water, 1/3 cup fat, 1/2 teaspoon salt, then a cup of matzah is added, and then 4 eggs. Ooh, that's going to be a little one. Oh, that's okay. So they do puff up, but you don't have to put them so far apart. They can be this tight. I got about 4 per row. And so now these are going to go into a very, very, very hot oven. Mine is set to 450 for 25 minutes. Start your timer so you don't forget. But while those are baking, I have my finished product here, as well as my filling. Let me grab my filling from my refrigerator. So this is a pastry cream that I made with, I wish we had an actual cameraman to like zoom in on things, but it's just me in my kitchen, everybody. This is made with coconut milk. Get the Thai variety. Usually Thai brands are a little fattier, and you really do want that richness. It's dessert, everybody. Please don't go low fat. It has the zest and juice of 1 lemon in there. It's got 2 eggs, and it is thickened with potato flour. You cook it over a double boiler until it gets nice and thick. You want something that's not going to ooze back out of your cream puff, right? So it needs a little bit of vigor to it. And this is something else I'd also recommend making the day before, because obviously, you know, it's boiling hot and it needs to be cold when it goes into the cream puffs. Just throwing things around, everybody. So make it the day before. Make all these pieces parts the day before, and then it's a really quick assembly process. You can do it 2 to 4 hours before you serve them. I wouldn't do it right before. Again, I think it's nice for it to have a little bit of smoosh to it. So there's a couple different ways you can fill. One way, and this is what the Manischewitz cookbook recommends. I usually start with a paring knife. You see, I just stabbed it with the sharp point. Just recommends cutting it 3/4 of the way through, opening it up, and then filling it with a spoonful of your filling. Like that. And I always think it's tempting. Like it wants to be inviting. I find it very inviting to have a little bit of the filling showing. Now, the other way you can do this is with a pastry bag. So here's my pastry bag. Always when you're filling a bag, you want to cuff it, because that gives you a clean top edge. I have just a really pretty simple hole to fill it. You know, there's nothing fancy, but you can really use whatever you have. You just want something about this size that you can use to pierce the cream puffs. I'm out of like clean spatulas after working on this. So that's why I have like a cookie spatula as opposed to anything else. Just me in my kitchen, folks. Don't even have that like team of behind the scenes cleaning people. Okay, flip it up. You can kind of shake the filling down to the bottom. You can also close it and use your fingers. Okay, so I don't like stabbing it with the pastry. It's just too hard. I like starting it with a paring knife. So you just, there's 2 ways you can do it. You can go in the bottom or in the side. So you could go in the bottom, and then I twist it to make enough room for the nozzle to get in. And then ditto, you can also go in the side. Just kind of pierce it and twist it and make a hole, okay? Your dominant hand should hold the top, and then you sort of twist it a little bit, because you're not like squeezing down this way, you're squeezing and twisting, and your non-dominant hand will actually hold the cream puff. You get the tip, the nozzle in there, you hold the cream puff in your other hand, and then gently squeeze to fill it up. And my judgment of how much filling to put in is you can start to feel the cream puff sort of strain as it fills up. And then I'll always add just a little tongue sticking out. Oh, that was too much of a tongue, maybe a little too tempting, but I do always love a little filling coming out the edge so that it is a temptation. But you can also totally hide the filling by doing it in the bottom. So again, just push the nozzle in, cup it. I always think like a baby bird, cup it like a baby bird in your non-dominant hand, and then squeeze that filling in. And you're gonna feel it sort of strain against your hand. Okay, and then it's hidden like that. So let's take a look inside and see what they look like. Hopefully, I mean, and this is always good. You should always test one in the kitchen as well, just to make sure you're getting enough filling in there. Oh, I mean, that looks nice. Could have more filling, but maybe that's just me. Cut this one. Oh, I mean, that is looking real perfect. Should I bring it a little closer? Look at that. See, this is why I like the side filling too. I think that works a little bit better. And then to finish these, you can always do something like a glaze, but honestly, that is a good filling too. The easiest way to make them look really finished and pretty, oh, that's brown sugar. There it is. There's my confectioner's sugar. I knew it was in there. A little bit of powdered sugar, confectioner's sugar sprinkled over top is what will make these look really finished and pretty. See? So I guess I also should go in for the taste test too, don't you think, Melanie?
I absolutely think that you should. Those look fantastic.
Yeah, I'm pretty excited about them. I mean, I love lemon filling, and I love coconut. So I really, really love this as a filling. So good. I love lemon. It makes you feel alive.
Yeah, lemon curd is wonderful. It's the best.
This is basically like a vegan lemon curd. It's somewhere between a vegan lemon curd and a vegan custard. Okay. If someone served this to me after Seder, I would have to ask, are these Passover? Are these kosher for Passover? This is not a matzah meal dessert. I do not believe it, but you saw me make it right here with your own eyes. So there you have it. Recipes on the blog. You will dazzle your family. And to boot, this is a 1930 recipe. I'm really, 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 really quite stunned. There you go.
Sarah, about how many did you get out of that single recipe? Like dozen, 2 dozen, approximately?
A little less than 2 dozen.
Okay.
If you go a little smaller, you can get 2 dozen. I think I counted about 20 out of the first batch.
I did not think this was possible until you showed me, because every time I feel like, and I think you probably had a similar experience, to get something to have that airiness, it means you got to beat the egg whites. Like you're basically like folding in that fluff. Like that's what gives it to you. Like that's what, and here you just.
The pâté au choux is so precise. When I learned how to do it, I really had to study it and looked at different recipes and different explanations. And it took me a couple tries to get pâté au choux as a concept correct in my own kitchen. So to make a pâté au choux, a cream puff shell out of matzo meal in one go, that's bananas. A banana filling would be good in this too. You know what? You could do savory too. You could do like a chopped liver mousse in here as well. You could do an egg salad in here. Be really tasty.
Yes, when we were looking at the original recipe at Passover Rama, I think she even said that. She said you could use these as an hors d'oeuvre where you fill it with a savory filling, or you could use it as a dessert.
And you can also, I love this as a little finger food, but you could also do sort of an individual dessert with a really big cream puff, or essentially with an eclair. An eclair is the same batter, but again, it's usually piped. You could probably try piping from a bag that has no tip on it at all and just squirting it in lines, and that's how you get like an eclair shape. But that's all that same basic dough.
Well, Sarah, you've blown my mind here. Now I might actually have to try this because also, as I think what Sarah and I talked about, we were trying to choose recipes also is, you want something, sometimes you can show people a new way to do things. And cream puffs are one of those things that I think, certainly for myself, it's always intimidating. Like, is it going to fall? How's this going to work? And you've really that looks so easy. I mean, it definitely took some elbow grease there, I would say, though.
But it was quick.
Really get those
someone just asked what temperature. Again, it's going to be in the recipe, but you started at 450. So cream puffs, pâté au choux have to be blasted with a high heat so that the steam is released, and you can't peek. The first 25 minutes in the oven, you cannot look at it. You've got to keep everything closed. But then after 25 minutes, you turn it down, I believe, to 325. Again, it's in the recipe. So it goes down, quite a ways. And at that point, you should let the oven open for a little bit to let out some of the moisture and also let some of the heat out. And that will be the moment of truth and probably amazement, because it was for me when I did this a couple of days ago, the first time. I was like, oh my gosh, they poofed. I could not believe it. So this is truly, it's an extraordinary recipe. It is. Let me also say, as a culinary historian, it is really rare that you make a historical recipe and say, this is extraordinary, this is amazing, this is delicious, everyone should make it. Like maybe 10% of all the recipes I cook, I have that reaction to, and this is definitely one. It's an incredible recipe.